Hello, my name is Amina and I like to talk about books. Today I wanted to talk about the 10 books that I read in the month of November. So I already spoke about the first 6 books that I read, and these were Heretics of Dune, which I gave 4 stars, Green Days by the River, which I gave 3 stars, The Midnight Library, which I gave 4 stars, The Arrival, which I gave 5 stars, Where the Forest Meets the Stars, which I gave 3 stars, Also Human, The Inner Lives of Doctors, which I gave 3 stars. So if you'd like to see more of my thoughts on those, I already made a mid-month wrap-up where I kind of go into a bit more in depth about them. In this video, I wanted to talk about the last 4 books. So the first book that I wanted to talk about is The City of Dreaming Books by Walter Moers. This is the 4th book in his Simonian series. I read the 13 and a Half Tales of Captain Bluebear many years ago, and I also have read, I believe I read most of Rumo if I didn't finish it, and I'm not entirely sure why. I think I literally had like the last bit to go, and I think I borrowed the book from someone and returned it to them, and so just never quite got around to finishing it off. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 5 stars. So if you've never read anything by Walter Moers, he has this imaginary world world where he sets all his stories, known as Zimonia, and he writes in German and they're translated into English. He also does these amazing illustrations to go with all his work, and they're also in depth, and the best way I can describe them is kind of a children's book for adults. So this particular book follows a dinosaur whose name I've completely forgotten. Yes, so it follows a dinosaur called Optimus Yarnspinner, who is a writer who comes from a place called Lindworm Castle. And when his godfather dies, he gives him this manuscript, which turns out to be the best piece of work he's ever seen. And so he goes in search of the writer. His journey takes him to a place called Lindworm Castle, and so his adventures begin. It is one of the most fantastical stories I've ever read, and there's just clearly a lot of work and thought that has gone into creating the story. The illustrations are beautiful. It really just takes you on this real adventure. It is a little hard to get into in the beginning. It is a big book, but it is a really nice story, and I really enjoyed the time that I spent reading it. The second book that I read was a lot shorter, and it was Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. I've also read Lanny by him. I think I read that last year, and he's very experimental in the way that he writes, both in Lanny and in Grief is the Thing with Feathers as well. So Grief is the Thing with Feathers follows the father and 2 boys as they lose both their partner and mother after she has an accident, and it's the process by which they go about grieving for her. And grief is represented by this crow that comes to stay with them, and I like the way it was told. I think I'm probably not the right audience for Max Porter's experimental type of writing. I think I probably prefer a bit more just traditional way of telling the story, but it is really interesting the way he kind of tells us about what's going on in this family's life and what this crow represents for them as they go through their process of grief. I think I'd recommend it. I definitely would recommend it. I believe the imagery of the crow and the personification of the crow is related to Ted Hughes, because the father in this family is a Ted Hughes scholar, and he is working on a poetry called, I believe, The Crow. I don't know much about Ted Hughes himself, so I have gone to look it up, and I do want to read that at some point as well, just to kind of have a bit more of an understanding what the role of the crow is in this particular book. It gave me, I've not read this, but I have seen the play and the movie, but it gave me the same feeling as A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, but obviously from slightly different perspectives, in the sense that Patrick Ness's A Monster Calls is looking more at, this is purely based on the play and the movie. I still need to read the book, but my understanding is it's kind of more about kind of that when you're preparing for someone dying, how that child in A Monster Calls is preparing for the imminent death of his mother, whereas this is about how these boys are grieving after the mother. And I'd say it actually focuses probably more on the father rather than the kids. But yeah, it's very interesting. I would recommend it. I'd probably want to reread it again. Third book I read, following on the kind of theme of Death and Dying is With the End in Mind, Dying, Death and Wisdom in an Age of Denial. So this is a book that was written by a palliative care doctor, and it's written in a series of case studies following different patients and people who have died, and talking about how palliative care as a specialty helped make their end of life journey better, and also helped the families and all of those around them be better prepared for death. I also think that Kathryn Mannix is a fantastic writer, just in terms of her prose, aside from the topic that she's talking about. She writes really beautifully, really poetically, and it adds so much more feeling to the topic that she is writing about. I read most of this on my plane journey, and I was trying really, really, really hard not to cry on the plane. But it was quite an emotional read. It's not sad in the sense that obviously every single person that we meet there in her book, most of the characters that she introduces us to do pass away. But I think I really felt how much the role that she and the palliative care team had in making that process of passing away a less traumatic experience for them and their families, helped them be better prepared for it, letting them know that it's not something to necessarily be afraid of, and that it's not going, and that, you know, they're there to make sure that it's not a painful process and it's not a distressing process. And I think obviously working as a doctor, you see so many different ways that people die, and not all of them are, for want of a better word, nice ways to go. Sometimes it can be quite harsh and quite traumatic and sudden. And yeah, now I'm, you know, after reading Also Human and being like, okay, I think this feeling of I don't want to stay in medicine is there. This kind of gave me a bit more like, oh, maybe I could do this. So I'm still thinking about it, but now I'm really beginning to explore whether, I don't know, it just felt really meaningful. What she did felt really, really meaningful. And not that the rest of medicine isn't meaningful, but I felt like that is somewhere that I could find a lot of meaning in my life doing Kathryn Mannix's job. It gave me a lot to think about, and I think it's quite weird. I've read a lot of books along that theme this year. So Being Mortal, obviously Grief is the Thing with Feathers, With the End in Mind. I'm sure I've read other books surrounding grief in the process of dying this year. So maybe it's a topic I'm just morbidly interested in. That is a book that I gave 5 stars. The final book that I read is Celestial Bodies by Joker Al-Harthi. This is a book that won the Man Booker Prize, the Man Booker International Prize. It is translated from Arabic into English. The writer is Omani. The book follows a community in Oman called, in a town or village called Al-Awafi, although they do travel out of Al-Awafi, but it is focused down on the families here and the community and their relationships with each other. It travels back and forth through time quite a lot, so you meet a character as they're born, and then you find out something that happens far into the future, and it moves back and forth quite a lot. So to preface my review, I'm going to say I actually really, really like this book. The reason I have a lot to say about it is I think it was so close to being a book that I would love and come back to over and over again. And even saying that, I do want to come back and read it. And because I'm currently trying to learn the Arabic language, I think I would also want to come back and read it in Arabic. The positives and negatives are kind of the same thing. So the positives about this book is that it has such a wide scope of topics that it tries to cover and ideas that it introduces. It has such a large cast of characters that we follow, and all of them have these unique personalities and unique identities and stories that they all have. But at the same time, it is quite a short book. It's only 250 pages long. And because we follow quite a lot of characters, it makes it really hard to care about any of them, because you don't get to know any of them in as much depth as I personally like. I really like getting I really like character focused books, and I like getting a lot out of the characters. And because there are so many of them, I found it difficult to really care about any of them, because we were just flitting in and out of their lives quite quickly. I think in the beginning I struggled with the translate. I don't know if it's a translation thing that I struggled with, but the English in the beginning I felt was a bit clunky. Obviously I can't judge that based on Joe Hartley's writing, that's more of a translation, but towards the end it was really, really good. I didn't notice that it was translated at all. I think the other thing that I struggled with is I was trying to find what tied everything together, and I'm not quite sure I got it. Another thing that could have made this so much better for me was perhaps if it had been a series of short stories instead, or just a bit. I think it's difficult. It's either it needed to be more tightly focused on a fewer characters, or if it was going to focus on so many characters, then they needed to have a bit more linking them together, as well as maybe just being a slightly longer book where we got to know each of them a bit better and got a bit more detail about each of their personalities. I think all of the characters ended up being a bit one-dimensional, in the sense that we were just following this aspect, or one or two. A few of them do seem a bit more multi-dimensional, but I don't know, they ended up all being quite flat, and I think that's because not enough time was spent across the board. There is some really beautiful poetic writing in here though. So I guess the blurb kind of focuses on three sisters, although I'd say the book has a wider scope. In the village of Al Awafi in Oman live three sisters. Maya marries after a heartbreak. Asma marries from a sense of duty. Khawla rejects all offers while waiting for her beloved who has emigrated to Canada. Elegantly structured, Celestial Bodies is the story of the history and people of modern Oman, told through one family's loves and losses. So I like this. I really, really like this. But I just feel like there were just some things that could have been done for me to really love it. I will definitely try and read more things by her. I think she has another book coming out next year, which I don't remember the name of, but from the blurb it seems it's a bit more focused on just one or two characters, so I think I might enjoy that a lot more if she has the same writing style and the way she approaches the topics as she does in here. So those are the remaining 4 books that I read in the month of November. I have just started reading Drive Your Plough Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. I'm pretty sure I've said that wrong, which is a book that has been translated from the Polish. Thank you for watching. Bye. So